Good evening. I'm Cynthia Elliott, President of the Rochester Board of Education. We want to welcome you to this evening's work session regarding the Facilities Modernization Project for Phase 3. I believe we have $450 million for this phase, and Chief Mike Smith is going to provide us with a presentation of the status of the Fmp project to date. Mr. Smith?
Good evening, President Elliott, Vice President LeBron, Superintendent, Commissioners. This evening, we're going to provide you a very high level of where we are to date with our Phase 3 Facility Modernization Plan. As President Elliott alluded to, $475 million. And as we first met in June, we had assured you that we would have a work session every month. And so we had our work session in July, August, and now it's our September version. We have made significant progress over the last month, and we want to kind of bring you up to speed as to where we are. Also update you on some preliminary recommendations, and then our latest on our academic plan work, and then finally to outline what the next steps are for the remaining 4 to 6 weeks of our work plan, with the anticipation of your final positive affirmation at the December board meeting. So tonight we're going to focus, as I said, on five preliminary recommendations, 5 buildings that we are strongly recommended be included in Phase 3. We will be looking for once again a positive affirmation from you this evening, so we can move forward on those 5. And then secondary, as I alluded to, Dr. Black's academic plan or academic update, and then finally next steps. So our test fit candidates, what we tried to do is we looked at, in the 5 buildings that we're talking about tonight, we looked at the structure of those facilities. We looked at the infrastructure items that are going to need to be completed at those buildings. We looked at the sites, not only the physical plant in the building, but also the school sites, the grounds, and so forth. And then what we would have to do in order to modernize these particular buildings. So our first recommendation is the Douglas campus. Douglas campus last year was the home of Northeast Northwest. Last year we moved the Northeast campus to Charlotte, and this year the Douglas campus is home for its first year to just Northwest, which is a 7-8 program. We did a test fit of the building, as you can kind of see on the left. We'll have some larger versions for you to review as well. As a 7-8 facility only, and we test fit all the requirements of the academic requirements for the state of New York, all the different specific programming that we needed to have, as well as all the additional programming that we would need in order for a middle school to run successfully in terms of library space and physical education, athletic space, and such. And the Douglas campus checks the box on all fronts. Almost unanimously from our committee, it was a strong recommendation to move forward, which is why we're bringing it here this evening as our first item. In addition, the Douglas campus is built recently built in terms of building building years anyway. Built in the 70s, and it has some significant infrastructure needs that we want to address in Phase 3. Most notably, air conditioning. The building has a primary area for common space on the lower level, main office, cafeteria, cafetorium, gymnasium, pool, etc. And then the academics are all in a tower that's adjacent to that, a stack in a sense. And that area becomes very, very warm, not only in the fall, but also in the spring. So that really needs to be addressed, as well as other infrastructure items in that building. So we would do a complete gut renovation of that facility, not only doing all the infrastructure upgrades, but also do a complete classroom refresh in that particular school. So that building really resonated, as I said, unanimously from the committee. Our second recommendation is the Edison campus. Edison, as you know, is a 9-12 program, primarily our CTE hub currently within the district. I think it has our most CTE programs in the district. Second East being our second school. It has been a project in Phase 1, in Phase 2, and we are strongly recommending continuing that work in Phase 3. The phase one work was primarily infrastructure. The building is actually held together by cables, in a sense, that hold the structure, the walls, so to speak, and they're under the ground. Those cables had started to fail, and we knew we had to replace those. So in phase one, that was the primary work we did in phase one. We also did some work on the library media center and some classroom refreshes. Phase two, we did some work on one quadrant of the building, one area of one of our showcase spaces there as our auto bay and auto mechanics CTE program. We also did a broadcasting studio. We did some fine arts work there. We did quite a bit of work in that one area of the building, and to really rave reviews, and all of you have actually seen it and were there for the ribbon cutting. This next phase, which would be the most of significant investment, would take on additional CTE programming, and those labs, as we refer to them, all the CTE labs really need a refresh. So like we did with the auto center, we will be looking to do in our building trades and in machine shops, welding area, and to bring state-of-the-art equipment in, as well as make sure we have the everything in place infrastructure-wise and safety-wise and so forth. And Dr. Black will allude to a little bit later some of our alignment with our CTE investment here with our district CTE plan. In addition, the infrastructure at Edison also needs upgrades. It has, for example, 137 air handler units on the roof. It's an incredibly sized structure, and also needs some air conditioning upgrades and some other work like that. So that'll all be part of our phase 3 program, which we would provide you more details on. But it is such an important investment for our district and our community. It certainly resonated with a unanimous from the committee. Our next building is Franklin. Franklin is currently a home of a 712. We are renovating the building as a 912 to be in alignment with the revised Board of Education policy. The building had significant work done in phase 1. The primary area was the auditorium, where we did a complete refresh in the auditorium and the core of the building. But the classrooms and the other infrastructure of the building really have not been touched. We've had some marginal CIP work, minimal CIP work over the past couple of years, but that just doesn't do this justice. So this would be another significant investment. As we all know, on Hudson Ave, the building has all the field space and square footage and lab space that we would need to operate a world-class high school. And so we would need to do a complete refresh of the infrastructure, as well as many classroom upgrades as possible. And I'll get to that in a little bit later. But I think we also need to make sure we manage expectations. The building here is, like, as Edison took 3 phases, we won't finish all the work in Franklin in 1 phase. It's just not feasible to do that. It probably will also require the students to move to swing space, because when we touch the infrastructure there, we're going to be basically having to turn the systems off and totally redo the mechanical systems in the building. So there's a lot more work to be done in terms of the detail work, but because of the attributes of the campus and the building and its location within the city, it was unanimously recommended at this point to move forward. Our final one, and this is a Monroe, which is, excuse me, I gotta make sure I keep up with my own, which was done in phases 1 and 2. I would say a complete modernization of that building in phases 1 and 2. The only thing that was left out was the window replacement. So that would be our phase 3. Our primary phase 3 program would be to replace the windows, a nominal investment compared to the amount of money we're going to be putting in the other buildings. The other item on the table certainly for discussion and to bring back to you for a final recommendation or approval is the ability for us to put in a pool at Monroe. Monroe had a pool, and in phase 1, it had reached end of life, so we had to take the pool out in a sense, and it's now currently the library space, I believe, is what we have in there now. So we knew we couldn't keep it where it was because of the nature of how we need to do the rest of the renovations. We do have space set aside from the gymnasium, so we built the gymnasium and the common area there, the entrance area, so that people could enter that end of the building and go to the pool or the gym. The locker rooms are all set up. Everything is basically there, except for obviously building the pool structure itself. So we will be bringing that, and a little more detail in regards to what the ability, the funding part of it, and that type of mechanics. But doing the windows is essential, and it's the final infrastructure work of that plan. Those are I'm sorry, one more. I've only got to 4. My apologies. The final one is Wilson Commencement Academy. Wilson Commencement Academy, as it once again had some past CIP work, minimal work in comparison to the needs of the building. This building has not been touched in phases 1 or 2. So this will be the first time this building has seen any modernization. It is, without debate, one of the primary schools in our district, and because it was built in the early 1900s, so to speak, it's an old structure, a lot of wood frame that we would need to really do a complete rehab of that facility to bring it to a modern learning center. In the 1990s, the district did add a gym space adjacent to the school. So that area would not be as much up for renovation as much as the other academic wing of the building. But the mechanical systems there have all reached, in a sense, end of life. We need to replace all those. So in that regard, every part of the building will be touched. There's also quite a few spaces. If you've been through Wilson recently, some of the music areas and so forth are really in need of a refresh there as well. So that building, we will be looking to do a complete renovation of that facility, and which is why it also resonated to it, in a sense, to a unanimous recommendation. I'm going to pause here for a minute before as Dr. Black comes up. Is there any specific questions around that, or would you prefer to hold your questions till the end? President Elliott, it's really up to you. I can answer.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. For Douglas campus, in the renovation, is it even possible, but are they going to maybe widen those hallways?
Yeah, it's a great question. So right sizing the classrooms and the hallways in that academic tower is really an essential part of it too. So I think what we have to do first of all is look at the number of classrooms we need to run the fully operational 7-8 program. And then because those classrooms, the center core, are really the ones that are pressing on the width of those hallways, decide if we can adjust those classrooms, resituate them, reorient them, so to speak, to create more space in the hallways. But that's one of the real negative effects of that stack is that it just feels a lot smaller than it is because of the narrowness of the corridors. They also had cafeterias in each one of those floors as well, which we will be taking all that out, which is also going to buy us some more space. So we're going to have a couple of different things that are going to completely redefine what those areas look like, which should give us a much wider space in the corridors. But that's one of the primary items on our list is certainly that. And then those interior classrooms, try to do something with that so we bring more natural light into those rooms. Right now, they're not really set up that way, so we're going to look at some of those options as well.
Okay, and my other concern was, are we going to be able to have simultaneous swing space where all this is going on for all of those facilities?
Sure. So one of the magics of this is being able to align your swing space with the planning of construction for the schools. Right now, currently, in phase 2, we utilized Marshall and Jefferson. If those spaces maintain, we have to take these schools and rotate them through those spaces strategically, right? To kind of figure out which ones are going to go where, how long they need to be there. That's essential to managing costs, because the longer students are in swing space, generally, not only is it's not good for them academically, but it also increases the cost of the job as well. So the timing of the construction, the identifying the swing space, minimizing the amount of time that students are in swing space, all those are essential. So when we actually put together the schedule, which would align with the finances, you'll be able to see how all that maps out. But really, in phase 2, the longest the school was in swing space as we got through it was Monroe, and that was 3 years. But I think we've got it now, so we can do it within 24 months at a scale of that type of project, which is what Douglas and Wilson and certainly Franklin, those would be that level of scale of renovation. So I think we were able to, we've learned lessons learned, so to speak, and we're able to kind of tighten that calendar up.
Okay, that's it for me.
Vice President LeBron? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's funny. Thank you, President Elliott. Quick question. I lost my thought, but I'm coming around to it. So I appreciate the phone calls and just having those conversations ahead of time to set the frame, what to expect around this. And I know one of my concerns was about the swing space and the impact on learning, as we know many of our schools are struggling, and how that might impact. So I know Dr. Black is going to be coming up in just a moment. Another thought that I had, more so for yourself, Mr. Schmidt, is around, we talked about CTE and our district's desire to expand CTE options throughout schools. I feel like this was touched on. We wanted to create spaces within our schools to allow for the creativity and unique. So that is going to happen?
Yes.
Okay.
In twofold. So one, we'll have a CTE roadmap to work from, what our actual programs that we're going to put in place. But the rooms also have to build to be able to have enough flexibility to kind of anticipate what CTE will be 15 years from now, right? So this may be our program right now, but maybe we make an adjustment. We can't have to go back and modernize the entire room again in order to bring something different in. So you get to build it with what our current needs are, but also put enough things, and mostly that's behind the walls, so to speak. That's the infrastructure of the room that allows for, maybe you just change out furniture or whatever it might be, and then you can use it for a different function. So both that short and long term, Edison's a great example. All those rooms at Edison, which are earmarked for current programs, can be easily adjusted. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Absolutely. And then my last piece is, I don't know, I'm probably going off kill a little bit, but I'm thinking about, I had a conversation recently, and it was like around 6th grade. Obviously, we're talking about 7 through 12, 8 and 9 and what have you. But I was thinking about our 6th graders not having maker spaces and science labs. And, that bothered me a little bit, because I remember dissecting frogs and what that does for the learning experience. It wasn't just fun, but it actually brought learning to life. And so when we're talking about revitalization and doing those things, I see Dr. Black smiling, so she has an answer, so never mind.
Right. From the academic side, I'll certainly let the expert take care of it. But from the physical side, all the schools in phase 2 had the capable science labs as well as maker spaces built into them. So that's kind of become our standard moving forward. Okay. And we have to just find out how to continue to replicate that in our buildings. But based on what the academic experts tell us, that's what we're going to. So
those schools that may not be part of this, eventually our plan is to get those spaces.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then figure out the best way to put it in place.
So,
thank you.
And before Vice President talks, just to follow up on that, and that's going to be within the budgeted amount that we have, correct?
It's an excellent question. So you don't want to promise more than you can deliver. It's our standard in phase 2, and it's becoming an expectation. The key to this is making sure that you have the program in place that the state will reimburse us on. And if we maximize the work that we're doing that's eligible for reimbursement, we have a local share allocation, and if that's how we choose to invest that, then we can certainly, and that's one of the choices we have. I think the other area is when you're building classrooms that you're looking for some multifunctionality, especially behind the walls, then you open up to opportunities where maybe there's a grant in 3 years that allows you to do something different in the STEM area or whatever it is. The capacity is already there within the room. So it's just a question of, plugging in whatever the new equipment is and so forth. So that's really the design behind the scenes. But right now, the phase 2 schools all had, I would say, a functional multi-purpose type of classroom, which we should be able to replicate within our cost structure based upon our previous experience.
Sorry about that, Vice President. Commissioner Simmons, did you have any other questions, Commissioner Simmons? All right. Vice President?
Yeah, so I have a few too. So let me just first say, I cannot see these maps. Or visuals that you've put in here. I tried to also expand my screen to 229%. I still cannot see what you're talking about here. So I would actually like copies of this, and also to make this public, because I know that this is a proposal, but the community and these school communities still need to actually give input on these. And I know that you're going to touch on that towards the end of the presentation, but I just had to say that because I cannot see these visuals. The other thing I just want to point out, that investment in vital infrastructure will allow, and then you put it for every school, Wilson, Commencement, or Edison, to serve the district for many years to come. I actually would like to understand what that translates to in terms of numbers, and then when we can expect this district to have costs for maintenance and repairs. Because as you know, right now as it stands, we don't have enough funding to fix all of our buildings. So we have limited money from Fmp. Even though it sounds like a lot, it's still very limited because these are very big capital projects. And then we also have where we look at all the buildings that we own and the infrastructure, we'll just never be able to meet all of the needs for every single building within our budget if it wasn't for FMP either. So just curious if we can get an estimation of how many years before certain upgrades or costs associated with upgrades when it will impact the district. I just also want to point out that when we borrow money, even for capital projects, we're borrowing money on tomorrow's students, so I just want to be mindful of that. The Northwest, though, that school was remodeled actually the same year that both my girls started 7th grade. It became Northeast Northwest, and they had remodeled that school and made it a blue school, red school. So when was that school, when it was remodeled to be Northeast Northwest? Because they used to have the blue red side before it became a lower upper type situation. Was there dollars invested in remodeling that building? I mean, the building, actually, the inside was new. There was a lot of new stuff inside.
Sure.
So just curious as to the remodeling now.
I can look into the specifics of that previous project. That previous project did not touch the infrastructure needs that the building currently has. You know, primarily the HVAC systems.
just
the plumbing, and
cosmetics?
I would say, yeah, that might be a bit of an understatement, but certainly the outside, a refresh on the outside, the painting and changing the colors and so forth, did not address the needs that we have interior of the building, and that's primarily HVAC, plumbing, and so forth. So I think that's where our focus right now is, because it's just in the second and third floor, it can get to be unbearably warm.
Oh, I know. My
during
girls
that
went
time.
there from
So,
7th
which
to
they
12th
didn't
grade.
address those type of items. I mean, I actually can pull the cost of that. I'm not certain of the exact amount of money that was put in for that, but this is a completely different type of a conversation.
Okay.
And the other part around the designs, a little bit of trouble kind of fitting those into the PowerPoint.
Okay.
But what I talked to Metasol about was being able for us to put the current 5 test fits and putting those documents and having them available on our website where everybody can see them, so to speak. So
Yes,
not
and
being
us
coy
too.
tonight, but trying to fit them into the small piece here.
Yeah, because I'm like, okay, is he
yeah.
showing us something here? Because I cannot read it or see it. The other and last piece, I just want to touch on the CTE piece. Before this board makes these approvals, if you will, or give a nod, I do think we actually need to understand the CTE roadmap for these schools before we say agree to them. Because for me, they go hand in hand.
Sure.
We're remodeling Monroe, and it's going to have a unique feature for CTE at Monroe that's different from East, that's different from Edison. Because I know we've had conversations in leadership around CTEs helping high school students drive their choice in schools, right, based on the career path that they want to take.
Right.
I think it's important that we know what schools will have what CTE programs before we vote. I know for me, I would like to understand that and how we're investing those dollars from FMP to support that.
I'll let Dr. Blackway, but that all must be included in the final product that you review
Should be.
before you vote.
Not just to us. I know you guys have community
No.
input sessions.
Yep.
The community should know what conversations are being had around CTE and the roadmaps. Because at the end of the day, these are their children, our children coming into this system in school, and our grandchildren. So they should be invested and understand what's happening with those dollars and what the future looks like. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I hope you can hear me okay. I just have 3 questions, mostly regarding how all of this will affect our athletic programs. I have a question regarding Edison first. It's a really industrial area on our west side. And I guess I'm wondering, are there any brownfield areas or other cleanup areas that are part of our properties that we should be concerned about or that fall under this FMP?
I think the short answer would be that before we do any work in the area around the building, that those studies are all required that we have to do. We did some of that work when we did the parking lot in phase 2 and so forth. Inside the building, the renovation inside the building would not fall into that category at all. And in terms of the athletic fields, they certainly are in an area where if we're going to do any type of substantial redesign or renovation work there, then that would absolutely be part of the process.
Okay. And then I think my second question was just regarding Franklin's campus. I know that the locker rooms aren't necessarily conveniently located next to the field. I know there aren't restrooms readily available other than some porta potties at this point. Probably one of the many reasons why we're renovating or making some of those renovations. But as part of the FMP project, will we be putting public restrooms for spectators, et cetera, somewhere near the field? Will they be in proximity? Are there buildings like that are planned as part of FMP for Franklin?
The short answer would be, yes, we know there's a need. In the locker rooms on the interior of the building would certainly need a refresh. And much like we did with Monroe, strategically put them closer to the fields and so forth. In terms of anything outside the building, we have some models that have worked. We've got some things that we've done. We're doing some work at Wilson Foundation's field right now with a kind of a press box restroom type of thing set up on a storage facility. They're not eligible for state reimbursement. So if we're going to do a project like that, we have to strategically allocate our resources in order to do anything like that outside the building. So it generally allows you to, refresh the bleacher system, refresh your field and so forth, but any exterior buildings like that are not eligible for state aid. So we've been able to do some work internally, being creative and strategic, and those fields are important enough to us. So we want to make sure we have all the necessary accoutrement, so to speak, that kids need. So they definitely are on our list, and I could speak more specifically about that as we go forward.
Okay, fantastic. And because I'm thinking just with Franklin's campus, I know that you could an addition be made onto the side of the Franklin building that's closest to the athletic field, so it would be less of a walk. Would something like that fall under FMP funding, or would we have the ability to have it funded?
It certainly could. I think one of the ideas of bringing these schools forward now is for my team to get a bit of a jump start on looking more specifically at these buildings and kind of getting some, instead of waiting till a final vote in December, we can start working on that now and come up with a couple of models that work. Any additions that only would be for locker rooms, for example, or something like that, I know you're not phrasing it that way, would generally not be eligible for state reimbursement. So we'd have to kind of look at some of the existing spaces and how maybe we reorient things inside the building to move things a little bit closer. It's just we have to look at kind of the project as a whole. And the athletics, I mean, it's an 8-lane facility, turf field in the middle of the city. It's used all the time by everybody. So we know that it's worth the investment. We have to figure out a way to strategically do it. And as President Elliott alluded to earlier, do it within our, there's going to have to be some choices made certainly along the way here because our local share dollars are limited. We've got 475 and 5% local share, so 25 million plus or minus. And that doesn't go very far when you're talking about a project like this.
And then my final question, Mr. Schmidt, is just about pool facilities in these 5 schools that you've spoken of. I know some of the schools have pools and are in okay shape. And I know there's been a talk of adding a pool to Monroe, which is fantastic. But will this be covered under FMP, or are those investments that we need to make as a district and start planning for?
So in general, with the not necessarily speaking for the state education department, but generally they look at a pool or a gym or a weight room or rather as a physical education space. So every building that based on its enrollment is allocated so many physical education spaces. If you want to build more, then it's certainly a district prerogative, and that's why they go up for bond and so forth in the suburban schools. Here, we would have our local share dollars with which to make some decisions on based upon what we feel are our priorities. And I think we would have to decide as a team, so to speak, when we get to that point about what would be in and what would be out in that. And we're closing in on that. We're not near that tonight by any means, but but this is a key point so we can get things started so we actually know how much money we have within the program to be able to allocate, or a list of wants, I guess is the better way to say it, versus needs, and how many of the wants can we really afford to do from that. But like I said, this is only the first base, so to speak. We've got a long way to go before we get to the actual list of stuff, but you're right in the way you phrased the question. So if Monroe is allocated for 6 PE spaces and the pool is a 7th, then it's on us to figure out how we do it. If it only has 4 and the pool is 5, then that's obviously a different conversation. So a lot more work to be done in that regard, though. But
And you'll be
great
able
question.
to tell us, like in a space like Franklin, which had a pool for many, many years and still does, if that can even be salvaged and remodeled.
Absolutely. In all these buildings, that'll be one of the items you look at, is that a plus or a minus? So the pool at Franklin right now, we're doing we're trying to, in a sense, we did some structural steel work on it recently. We put a new liner in it. So we think that pool's going to be operational here within the next 4 weeks or so. As you know, putting a liner in a pool is not easy on your neighborhood pool, but if you're trying to put it on a pool that size, there's all kinds of challenges that could come into it. So that's one of the areas where if we can do that now, then it would not need to be done during the modernization. So some of that stuff we're trying to tackle as we go along here.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Thank you, Mr. Smith.
And this is your slide.
All right, good evening. So I'm here to layer on the connections to the academic program as contributed by the Division of Teaching and Learning, which includes all of your content area directors, your social emotional supports, and some of the other offices that fall into teaching and learning.
Let me just clarify. Is this separate from the FMP?
Nope, this is part of the FMP
Part of, okay. All
So
right, thank
one
you.
of the big pieces that we got feedback from the state and from Dr. Jallo is that we have to ensure that as we're building buildings or modernizing buildings, that we are deliberately tying in the academic needs and program design. And so at the table, we have started with that conversation to say, if we're building this here, how does that benefit or take away from the academic program overall? And so I'm going to give you a little bit of information about how we've layered on top of the FMP conversation around the building and the HVAC around how it impacts the academic program, which is ultimately what we're here to do, which is educate students. So in terms of the overall conversation, what we are striving to do in this is to ensure that as we modernize buildings, we also have infrastructure that allows for consistent programming options across all buildings. So if it's happening in the K-6 building or a 7-8 building or a 9-12 building, there should be some equity and parity across campuses so that students have equitable access across the schools. We were really thinking about how to develop the clear continuums of learning between and among zone configurations. While we know we haven't decided on zones or neighborhoods or that like, we want to make sure that as we're articulating the needs for the schools that we're trying to modernize, that we make provisions for students to have access, again, among and between zones. So if you have a campus in one zone or neighborhood, they should have equal access to certain things in other zones and neighborhoods. Also, in kind of outlining what we need, the availability of specialized program spaces. We have Montessori program, we have expeditionary learning programs, we have PBL programs, we have an IB program. And so how do we ensure that, again, as we're modernizing spaces in these buildings, we have the accompanying requirements for programs in terms of spaces and infrastructure. And then this has been a hot button issue as recently as this evening, the expansion of CTE programming across the buildings in all secondary schools. I'm supposed to touch this and this. And so I'm going to go over kind of the 4 big buckets. So consistent programming options. So this is allow for the expansion of electives, extracurricular activities, and athletic options. As we modernize programs and add lab spaces and flexible spaces, this will allow programs across any school to be able to kind of build a couple of different things. As you heard Chief Smith allude to, what happens behind the walls in terms of drops and wires and plumbing and things, those types of spaces being built will then allow us to develop academic programming that can fit in multiple spaces. We heard maker spaces, so facilities that have spaces for large and small group experiences. So as the academic team and the Division of Teaching and Learning was working with the Fmp team to say, in any school that we modernize, we want to have spaces that can accompany a small group, 2 groups, 3 groups, a large group. How do we have flexible spaces that have things like removable doors so that you can make spaces do different stuff for you? We had our essential area teams, and so I'll highlight here that all of the members of the academic team at some point in the last month and a half have been at the table with the Fmp planning team to articulate if you had to identify the major spaces that you need and what you need in them, what would you identify? And so our art department, our music department, our PE department, athletic department, our academic departments were at the table contributing to how we would build out spaces. So we named essential area spaces like your art, your music, your gymnasium. The conversation around what Commissioner Malloy lifted up around the location of restrooms and locker rooms and laundry facilities, all of that conversation came from the content area directors around what would make it easier for students to access diverse programming. We talked about athletic fields and facilities, and so that conversation around can we offer swimming, potentially, right, in all of our secondary schools, that would require all of our secondary schools to have access to a pool. And so how does that then impact the academic program? If I want an intro to lifeguarding course in the course selection catalog, I have to make sure that across all of our buildings, there's access to facilities to facilitate that kind of learning. And then outdoor learning spaces. And so we have a couple of campuses now that have spaces for farming and gardening and outdoor carpentry type of areas. How do we ensure that, again, as we modernize our spaces, we provide access for students to be able to engage in a diverse set of learning experiences? Clear continuum. So this is a really important notion that as we modernize spaces, we have to make sure that there are enough spaces that our bilingual students, our ENL students, and our students who are identified with exceptional needs can remain and stay inside of buildings. And so how do we create spaces that, again, are flexible enough and large enough and diverse enough that any continuum, any school in the FMP program can house all of our academic in terms of bilingual or ENL or SPED programming. Right now, that's a limitation for us where we have a limited amount of rooms. And so one building may have one program, and then by the time they get to a secondary school, have to go somewhere else. We're thinking about our continuum to say, hey, if you're in 7 and 8 here, how do you then go to another facility where 9, 12, your program is not disrupted, and some of the relationships that you've built with your cohorts and your members can stay intact. So that's a clear continuum, and that's how we've kind of, again, contributed to the conversation to say we want to make sure we have rooms that can house a variety of our programs, 812, a 1211. How do we have classrooms that have the requisite size, doorways, egresses in terms to accommodate our students that have specialized equipment? How are we making space for that in these plans? Really deliberately, because the 5 schools that we heard this evening are our secondary schools, so we thought it was really important to call out how this FMP program really speaks to the improved secondary programming. For our 7-8 campuses, we are really thinking about how to align some of the spaces to requirements from AMLE, which is our middle school partner that's helping us to think about 7 and 8 programming in alignment with our revised board policy. The addition of learning opportunities to support student exposure to choice. And so thinking about what happens in middle school, you have your things like facts and home economics and technology that are precursors for some of our CTE programming. And so how in our middle school spaces do we then provide, again, modernization and improved facilities that students can experience that in middle school so they can choose the requisite high school. And then, again, spaces for increased transition and social emotional supports. A very unique feature to the conversation was bringing in our social emotional supports to say, hey, social workers, counselors, what kind of spaces do you need in order to do your job differently? How do you support students? And so that team was also brought into the conversation to say we need, again, individual counseling spaces, small group spaces. We've talked about sensory rooms and calming rooms and those, again, accompanying things that will make transitions in our spaces better for kids across the continuum. In terms of high school, so our 9 through 12, again, you heard me list off what's important for our bilingual and our special education students. We want to make sure that we have spaces that can receive students across all the continuums in all buildings. Again, the increase in CTE courses and pathways across all campuses. When all is said and done, every secondary school will have at least 2 CTE programs in them that we will add to over time every year until we're done. The pathway or the roadmap, as Chief Smith named it, will be provided. But that is the notion that also in our secondary spaces, in the spaces identified as CTE, they should be able to be fluid and flexible. Because what's popular now may or may not be popular in 15 years, but the wires, the pipes, the things got to be good so that we can put a program in, and if it's not working or if we need something else, we can put a program out and put something else in. Then we are adding the spaces to add additional driver's education courses across. And so this was our chance to say, how do we ensure, and I know you're saying, how does we modernize facilities and add to the driver's ed? Well, we're going to build the programs. We got to build the parking spaces to house the cars for driver's ed. So why not do it? Let's do it. Citywide specialized programs at all campuses to be application and choice. And so again, flexible spaces. So we're having CTE in all secondary schools. All secondary schools will also have flexible spaces to do specialized programs. Think about your foreign language, think about your sign language, think about things that aren't CTE, but might also interest kids. As we're thinking about how to design flexible spaces, diverse spaces, that then comes into how do we bring in high school redesign and high school design into the FMP to ensure that as we modernize buildings, they can receive the programming for students. And then, again, as we talk about things like entrance and egress, and I heard Commissioner Adams talk about hallways, that notion of freshman academy fits in there, because how do we put our freshmen in specialized spaces or in wings that are just for them to help them transition? As part of this conversation for FMP, those notions are also happening. So we're talking about doorways. How do we ensure that people can enter through a separate doorway, or how do we ensure that there's a separate hallway so that we can wrap our arms around our first-time ninth graders in a different way than we are now, and that the facilities meet that need. And then again, specialized programming. Montessori does not fit here because that's an elementary program, but we have expeditionary learning. That's a K-12 continuum. Problem-based learning, that's a K-12 continuum. IB, that's a K-12 continuum. And so how do we have facilities and materials and spaces ready to receive those programs? And then our maker spaces, and this is just a highlight for maker spaces and collaborative spaces where students can develop skills and talents that help them build strong community connections. I will say there's also a lot of conversation about how do we have spaces in our FMP that allow for our CBOs to come in. So we talked about where do our partners potentially come in and have dedicated spaces. How do we make sure that those are built into the modernization so there's not a reason why we can't have partnerships if we've dedicated space and how we rebuild. And so those are conversations that we've also had around building the academic program. And so I'll pause there. I said a whole lot for questions.
Commissioner Malloy, I'll start with you if you have any questions for Dr. Black.
Not at this time. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was nice to see how this ties into our academic goals. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think you're done though, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, you are done? Oh, okay, all right. Commissioner Patterson, you have any questions for Dr. Black?
Yes, thank you. Reference screen number 10.
Give me a title.
You spoke relative to athletic fields and facilities, and some of the feedback I'm getting is to make sure I mention that, and this might be a question for you or Mike, I don't know, but that our fields become like multi-use if we're going to invest in, you know, these new sports programs or facilities, I should say, that when we do build a field that we make it multi-use, so for both male and female, and different type programs as some of the suburban schools do. And again, I don't know if we have any existing right now, you can speak to that, but if we're going to go forward, that's one question. You can speak to that, and I have another one.
Okay. The answer is absolutely. All the fields we have installed have lines or the capacity for any activity from football to field hockey and everything in between. So in fact, the most recent one at Charlotte, we just finished doing those lines today as well. So all those fields have the capacity to accommodate any single sport. And if we wanted to do something different, we certainly could add something if something came down the line. But certainly any current activity or sport that's being offered, we can certainly support that at all of our fields that we've recently put in.
Yeah, and another thing while I have you, and just one more for Dr. Black, Mike, is when we're part of the facilities modernization program, I would like us to start thinking future as far as even class, maybe on the higher level, maybe 9 through 12, how we structure those classes. And again, the only reason I say that is because I just came back from some professional development, we'll call it, And at Harvard, they recommended that they're seeing real promise with the way they've structured their classes, almost like on a U, with the instructor being down below to give our kids almost like a college atmosphere. So just something to think about. You know, not that you have to implement it, but something to think about.
You go to Harvard, don't you? You go ahead. The Harvard student will take that one.
So I think what you're mentioning is how we set up spaces. So the notion of your furniture, which all part of the Fmp program, how we select different size furniture, how we orientate rooms. One of the things we talked about is the flexibility in mobile furniture. And so when you have the chance to do something like the Fmp Project, you buy tables that can go up and down. You buy risers that can be positioned differently. You have tables that can be modular and kind of put in 4s, put in 2s, put in U's. That's some of the conversation that we brought from the academic team about when we talked about the furniture selections in the spaces. Those things come up too. But those were programmatic decisions that are very easily kind of negotiated. And a good example of that, if you visit Hart Street at any point, some of the newer furniture we put in Hart Street for professional development is around that kind of modular furniture that can be used for a variety of purposes.
Even on the second floor,
Yes.
that space there is similar to what you're referring to, Commissioner Patterson. And also, when I went to Cube one year in Miami, the superintendent invited us to see some of the schools, and that was the first time I saw that kind of furniture that is being talked about. Yep. Where there was, and to my point, and what I was going to ask is student involvement in designing the classes, because, you know, they know better than we do, you know, how they, you know, want to, how it works for them, because I'm just thinking, being in those seats, you know, those just traditional seats, hours on end, and, you know, you got kids that, you don't want to get up, because I can't sit still that well. But then they get penalized if they're not sitting in the seats, as opposed to if there's a bean bag, they can get the bean bag and, you know, do some reading and that kind of thing. So I'm glad that, you know, we're looking at, to Commissioner Patterson's point, we're looking at a different way of arranging our classrooms that are more, you know, conducive to who they are. Plus, if they're getting up early in the morning, you know, they may just want to, you know, relax, you know, chill out and stuff. So, yeah, I'm excited about that. Vice President LeBron?
I had one more question for
Oh, I'm
Dr.
sorry.
Black. Yep. Just clarification, again, there's so many acronyms that fly across, and on screen number 12, it's the AMLE best practices.
Yep.
I'm not going to pretend to know everything, so I'm going to ask.
American Middle Level Educators Conference. So it's the professional development that we're bringing in and adopting to make sure that when we rebuild our 7-8 continuums, we are building in a framework that is tried and true.
Thank you.
Is that it, Commissioner?
That's it.
Patterson?
Thanks.
All right. Vice President LeBron?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of points, but one, we have that multi-purpose room downstairs, and I know I've brought it up over the years because it really drives me nuts that we created this really fancy, schmancy, beautiful multi-purpose space downstairs. But that's the type of space I would love to see in actual schools all across the district. And I'm looking at Mike specifically as our chief of operations. But I do think that that space, though, does align to the things that you're both making points of right now, right? It allows for adaptability of the furniture. It allows for students to write on the desk, right? And make it a smart desk, if you will, by being able to do calculations and even writing right on the desk and walls. So I would love for us to have our classroom set up that way in the future. I do appreciate, this is my first time seeing the academics and the FMP working together and tied, at least for myself in the last 5 years. So I have to say I wholeheartedly appreciate that these conversations, right, and decisions are not happening in two different departments and silos, but that it is intentionally, you guys are working together collaboratively to have these conversations. And I know that they can't be easy because each side probably has some vision for what you want to see in academics versus operational, because Mike, I often get on Mike about Mike's line of thinking is to be the most efficient possible with the best cost efficient, and I appreciate that. But then there is that social emotional academic piece that has to be tied in. And that brings me to that point. I truly appreciate that even social emotional was thought of, because One of the things that this district and this board and previous board members who are no longer here fought for was social, emotional, restorative, right? And part of the restorative practices were that schools have help zones and cool down spaces for kids and counselors, and even our sentries, right? To be able to take a kid into a cool down space versus having nowhere for them to go, and then the sentry's just walking in a circle with the kid trying to de-escalate that way as that kid is encountering other kids. So I really, really hope that once we see the actual plans and that they're presented to the community, that there's buy-in from the school communities and that the community understands that a lot of thought went into these decisions and these designs, and that it's not just a design based on the operationals piece, right? But that it ties into the academic, social, emotional. Because I think a lot of these decisions are difficult decisions, but if the community knows how decisions are made, why they were made the way that they were made, that there's more respect in the decision happening versus kind of feeling like the decision's just being made and they have to accept it. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President. Commissioner Simmons?
Okay, so I love the plan. I'm not even going to belabor the conversation. I agree with the sentiments expressed by Vice President LeBron. The question I guess I have is about Rochester Early College. Because when I think about the schools that are on here right now, I completely understand the decision-making, the gravity of those schools, how big those schools are, what needs to happen. So I guess I'm looking more so for some visioning, like down the line. What's going to happen with Rochester Early College? Because 98% graduation rate, but 300 kids in a U-shaped hallway. What are the plans for that school?
You putting them in a building?
So right now, we're talking buildings, not schools.
Yeah.
Right? So I want to be careful of mixing the two and how it gets a little muddy when we do, right? But we will have a plan, and that's where the community input sessions come in, about what are we going to look like in terms of school design, school programming, right? But these are buildings right now that we're talking about renovating, not tying them to, per se,
To the actual
Franklin being
school
Franklin,
campus, okay.
you know, Edison being Edison, right? Like, you know, we're looking at that as well.
Because I want them in their own building. That's my point.
Once we start going through the community and getting input and
Okay.
feedback, that feedback will be solicited and wanted as we make some decisions about what we look like moving on. Okay?
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, Commissioner Simmons? Any? Okay. Commissioner Adams?
I'm good.
No questions? All right. All right, thank you. So, anything else?
So we do have a couple of more slides
Okay.
that we'll go through, and then we'll open it up for any of the other things, right?
All right.
One of the areas we want to be just upfront and transparent about is, right, if we're talking about infrastructure upgrades, right, how much is that going to cost once we start getting into buildings? How much money will it really take to air condition a building, air condition a campus, and how much money that's going to lead for other things? And Kathy and I Dr. Black and I were talking today. We both had the privilege of building a brand-new school, right? Right now, we're asking our content experts, our people, like, what they would like to see if we were building a new school. But we have to operate in the existing footprint that we currently have, right? So there are going to be those trade-off costs about, hey, what is it that we want to see? What is it that we can see? What is it that we're able to do? So as we begin to have those things, that's what that core model is. We've asked our content experts to tell us what they would love to see in a building, right? But based on infrastructure upgrades, based on how much funding is left, based on the existing footprint of the building, not everything may be able to be accomplished in those sense. So we want to make sure that's there. And also that we're driving this based on the maximum cost allowance, right? That we're looking at the district and continuing to work with SCD to make sure that we're maximizing and driving what we can get in terms of reimbursement. And then the last slide, just once again, we're going to continue to test fit the core model to the rest of the buildings, right? And we're going to continue that work, and we're going to select that short list of Phase 3 candidates. This is 5 that you just have in front of you that we believe approve or they've passed the test fit model, right? They fit perfectly in there, right? And there's going to be others that we'll be bringing back in the next month. And then we have public hearings on the 12th, 20th, and 25th, where we will be soliciting some feedback as well from the community around this, and we need the community input on these projects as well. So at this point, I just turn it over to Mr. Schmidt to close us off.
Well, let me just ask, Mr. Superintendent, would you explain to the public what we mean by core model?
So the core model is what Dr. Blacken was talking about, where we met with all the content experts to say, what is it that you want into a school that has 600 kids, 800 kids, 1,000 kids? What does it look like from an arts standpoint? What does it look like from a social emotional counseling, social work standpoint? What do the classrooms need, right? So all those conversations, the work that we've took on with the team.
You were coughing through it, turn it off. Okay, all right. I could hear it. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. So, Mike, you have something else to share with us, or should we?
Just if there's no further questions, to kind of bring this to closure this evening, looking for an affirmation or an amen or
So-
a thumbs up that these 5 are in. And what we will do is this: if we can get to the consensus tonight on these 5, then the amen was my idea, by the way. I thought that was probably a great way to do it. If we can get to these 5 tonight, what my team now will be working in 2 different pathways. So the first pathway, we'll take these 5 schools and go to the next step, so to speak, of driving, a lot of the different MCA requirements. We'll have building condition survey material done. We'll have a lot of the essential work that we need to get done, that we'll have, in a sense, a 4-week head start from what our initial thinking was. And so that's kind of one pathway. The second group will continue to meet, and we will bring back to you a next set of recommendations following our pre-existing timeline. Would be the last week of October as our work session. Excuse me. And it can be, we can bring by legislation up to 12. Our initial was 9, so somewhere between 5 and 7, so to speak, or 4 and 7. We'll come back with those recommendations, and I think in the meantime, based upon our other conversations, other feedback, and so forth, probably another at least a one-on-one conversation and so forth to kind of bring everybody up to speed, so kind of know where we are, and then kind of go from there. The reason why we really broke them apart is because these 5 were just no-brainers, right? They're so essential to our district. We know we have to do them, and it just felt like it was conventional wisdom to do that. The next 4 or 5 or whatever it might be, they might also be that, but they also might require some additional conversations that we may need to have. May require us to have another work session. I don't know what I don't know, but what I didn't want to do is have the whole process be slowed, so to speak, because of a conversation around a smaller set of schools. So with your thumbs up this evening, we're going to move forward on these. These will be the baseline of what we provide you with the report the draft that you will see at the beginning, somewhere in like mid-November or whatever, somewhere in that ballpark, so you can vote on it in December, and then we will add the additional ones, but obviously not until we have more public conversations, and certainly at least one more work session here with all of you.
So let me just start off with Commissioner Adams and see if it's a thumbs up. Should we take and I'm looking to the General Counsel, should we do a motion for this, or just a thumbs up and wait until the entire project at the end? My only concern is that as we move through your presentations with like the next iteration of schools, that there may be some change, and we've made a motion for, these the 5 that we're looking at now. So that's
Right.
just yeah.
So I just want to also say, so before the General Counsel gives us legal advice on this, is that we do have a new fiscal monitor who's also going to be taking over this piece, FMP as well. So while Dr. Jallo may be involved now and is saying yes, I do think we can, for me, I would rather that we give a general thumbs up versus voting, because the state still has to approve, and that approval is going to transfer to Dr. Alicia versus Dr. Jallo. So I would rather he gets here, gets up to date, but that we give them a thumbs up. I'm okay with it and still record, but.
But let me just say, even with the monitor, I think we still have the final authority to make the vote on that. But again, just in case something comes up and something like the Vice President is saying, can we record a thumbs up? And I'm looking at Charisma for that. General Counsel Deal.
Right, yep. So, first, thanks to, Mr. Mike Schmidt and Dr. Black for a great presentation. I think I've said before that straw polls are really kind of meaningless for the board. So the truth is, like, you should take, if you're directing like an action be taken, then it should be pursuant to a resolution. However, I do kind of concur that there are some things in this kind of presentation that are a little imprecise, right? And so I think there will be an opportunity at a future date to really get like a precise resolution if Director Schmidt is okay with that. So for the purposes of what he does next, I think an informal thumbs up is okay, but once you're ready to really kind of direct action, then you do want to take a resolution.
Yeah, plus I think the minutes also will address it as well. Commissioner Adams?
So, for me, I think it's important that we get started. I really think that's important, and if what we're saying this thumbs up allows them to go ahead and get started, I'm with that. But I think it's important that we get started. And so, if you're saying, I'm just trying to be clear, that he's going to be able to move forward with just the straw poll or the thumbs up, I'm good with that. But if not, I'm ready to vote for it.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, but my only concern, Commissioner Adams, is that if there's some changes down the road, and we've made a motion for this, then we may have to come back and change the motion. I think what we probably should do is wait until we get all of the
Agreed.
Schools reviewed and make one motion for all of those schools that we're renovating. So.
That would be, all this will do will be allow me to give direct guidance to my team to, let's get working on these 5 schools that, unless something totally unusual happens at this point, they're not going to change. But it does give you the authority as the board to make one vote on the entire group, which I would be more comfortable with too. I think that's a better way to go. And that also does not deviate from our original plan of bringing the schools informally to you at a November draft report and then with a final vote in December. So I think we stay on that pathway. You've given me the acknowledgement with thumbs up or whatever it is. No thumbs down, I have low self-esteem, so we're going to do that, don't do that. But I think we got enough to go on, and I think we're in good shape.
Yeah, I think we're fine with the go-ahead. You got our thumbs up, and
yeah, and I apologize. I referred to Mike as Director Schmidt. He is the Chief of Operations. So thank you.
See, that's about his self-esteem. We have the right place.
I was almost a Harvard student about 15 minutes ago. That worked out pretty good for me.
Yeah, Vice President LeBron has a.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I'm on record that I supported and support these 5 schools, especially Franklin, because I've been adamant about Franklin needing lots and lots of TLC and upgrades, and students and staff deserve it. But I do want to just point out, though, that the new legislation actually does give the state the authority to either approve or reject our proposal. So even if we vote on it and Dr. Alicia came out and he didn't agree, we would have to figure out, I don't know how the process is for FMP for the disagreement. I know with Dr. Jallo, there has to be like a public hearing and then the state commissioner would give. But I think this is something that we look into because it is new legislation. So I just want to put that out there for the public to also understand that we're supporting right now, but there is a state component this year that was added to phase 3 that we've never had to deal with before. So we're supporting. Hopefully he will support, we get him on board as well. But if he does reject, I would like us to understand what that process is if we come to a crossroads.
Agreed.
All right. Commissioner Adams?
No, I was looking to see, what you want, my thumbs up? I was looking at Commissioner
Malloy, do you have some comments or questions? I didn't see a hand, so I thought you
Oh,
didn't have a
okay,
question.
no problem. Yeah, I just wanted to say it's a thumbs up for me to begin
Okay.
this work in earnest. Thank you.
All right. So Commissioner Patterson, is there a thumbs up for you or thumbs down?
Yes. It's a yes for me.
Okay.
For what? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
To go ahead with
Okay, thank you.
the plan.
All right, thank you. All right. So if there's no other business, motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor? No, somebody got to make the
Second,
motion.
motion by
moved.
Commissioner Adams,
So
seconded.
moved.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.